Good morning, everyone. It'll just be a few moments before we get started. Okay. Almost ready. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. Uh, my name is Larry Klein. I'm mayor for the city of Sunnyvale, and welcome to the 10th installment of the Virtual Office Hour address. People continue to say how really important this is for them. They really appreciate this weekly update. It gives you a chance to ask some questions. It allows me to tell you what's been happening at the state, at the city, at the county level. It also allows me to provide some words of encouragement to everyone in our community. So thank you for allowing me to represent you and continue to work for you. And these are extraordinary and difficult times, but people in Sunnyvale and the Bay Area have been heroes. So, from our healthcare workers to our supermarket workers, delivery staff, city staff, casual workers, it's really important that all the essential workers that are out there um, really are given thanks because they've helped us over the last 10 weeks now as far as the pandemic response has been. And it's been difficult for a lot of people. I hope everyone is healthy and staying well. Please take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Get outside your house if you can in the beautiful weather, in your backyard. Take a walk around the block. Sheltering in place has helped, but it can be stressful for a lot of people. Keep following the county health orders in order to continue to flatten the curve. Remember, you can make a difference as far as stopping the spread of the virus. Continue to wash your hands, don't touch your face, maintain social distance when you're out, only go out for essential items, and reduce the number of people that you come in contact with. But most importantly, of course, is wear your mask. It really does help. We're not out of the woods yet. We're definitely seeing things start to open up. There's a lot of reports of quarantine fatigue around the Bay Area as well as around the nation. And Americans are growing weary of the social distancing, of not being able to interact with friends, and especially as we get into summertime and the weather gets nicer, people really want to see other people, interact. So it is difficult, but it does make what people are doing does make a difference, and fatigue continues to increase over time. That being said, continue to try to do the right thing. You could be a carrier, so you could be a carrier, or other people that you meet could be a character and be asymptomatic and not showing that they actually have COVID-19. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. It's been another busy week. We're now 66 days after the March 16th public order, and from multiple Bay Area counties have made some adjustments this week, to start to open up, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But since the declaration, a lot has happened, and a lot more happens on a daily basis. I have conference calls with, different electeds. I have press conferences that I have to watch just to stay up to date on everything that's happening at a federal, state, and county level. But it's really important, and I hope this, what the updates that I'm giving to you on a weekly basis are kind of focusing on what I think has been really the big important things that have happened over the last week. And I'll start what's happened over the last week on a little bit lighter note. So last Saturday was Armed Forces Day, and city staff, raised the POW MIA flag for the first time in city history at City Hall. So I was happy when a few months ago council approved flying the POW MIA flag at City Hall for several different events during the year. But it was good to honor those who have served our community in the armed forces, as well as those who never made it back. So, I think that was a nice thing. If you go by City Hall, you can still see the POW MIA flag there. We weren't able to have a big ceremony like I wish we had been able to for our first time, but I think it was important to at least fly that flag in honor of our armed forces. On Monday, and we'll get into the big thing from the county standpoint, but one of the things that I did announce this past Monday is Caltrans gave me feedback, and I've been working directly with Caltrans for the last 6 months. There was an incident at Poplar and El Camino Real that injured 3 students. It was an early morning accident of a driver basically looking into the sun and ran into 3 students in the crosswalk. So we've been, that community, that portion of that neighborhood, as well as the school district, the PTA, has been working with Caltrans for quite a long time. Caltrans has been very responsive, and so I really appreciate their response as far as that's concerned. They've restriped those lights, they've reset the timing, they've done countdown timers as opposed to just a flashing hand walk as for the crosswalks going across El Camino. But one of the things that they committed to doing was doing a traffic study and then figuring out whether or not we could lower the speed limit along El Camino Real. And in Santa Clara and in Mountain View, the speed limit on El Camino Real is 35. Somewhere along the way, the speed limit in Sunnyvale was set to 40 miles per hour. And this has been brought up multiple times with city staff, and there's two issues, one of which is it's a county road, so we can't really force that much of anything to happen on that road. So Caltrans is the arbiter of what happens there. And then of course, in order to reduce studies, there's a whole process that has to go on for a traffic study. Well, that traffic study was done at the beginning of March, before COVID-19 and the shelter in place started. And one of the things that I've been doing, over the last few months is continuing to check in with the Caltrans staff on have they finished the evaluation, have they looked at the study, have they made a decision. At the end of last week and over the weekend, I finally got updates that they will be lowering that speed limit all along El Camino Real, which makes it safer. Yes, 5 miles per hour isn't a big change, but every reduction in speed increases or reduces the chance of a fatality. So it is very important as far as El Camino Real, and it also kind of realigns the speed limits along, El Camino, between the different cities. So that was a positive announcement that happened, from a city standpoint on Monday. On a county standpoint, and we've been pushing, quite a while to figure out when we're moving more into stage 2. And on Monday, Dr. Cody finally issued an updated shelter-in-place order that allows certain additional businesses to open, as well as activities within the county. And that went into effect at 12 a.m. this morning. So the previous shelter-in-place order was set to expire on May 31st, and now we're a lot more aligned with other counties. So a lot of the counties did very similar orders now. It's bringing the Bay Area into stage 2, and some areas around the state have already moved into stage 2, but we had been closely monitoring the new rates of COVID-19, as well as the death rates, and luckily we're finally seeing an actual downturn as far as the number of cases. So that the new order made two big changes. One, it allowed retailers to provide curbside pickup service. So that means not just restaurants, but any retail that is doing deliver, or that has retail goods to sell, can now open their doors. There are lots of requirements as far as they must have direct access to a sidewalk, a street, an outdoor walkway, a parking lot, or an alley for pickup. So the majority of retail can now reopen, but things like Valley Fair can't reopen because all the businesses there are within an enclosed space, and they all face towards an enclosed space, except for a few that actually have outdoor access. The businesses must limit the number of workers inside the facility. The order also allows, those businesses doing manufacturing of goods within the community that are then being sold to actually start producing. Warehouses can start distribution services. So it actually ramps up, the delivery service of what is actually being provided. All businesses, must post signage. And one of the good things that the county finally did was standardize the signage templates. So, businesses need to update their signage, but one of the things is there's a green check mark that's really COVID ready, meaning that they've a business has filled out all the requirements, has put a policy in place and posted it at their front door, and then basically added this green check mark, which that COVID-19 prepared sign basically lays out that they have a procedure in place. This is similar to what was done before. The problem was every restaurant, every grocery store had a slightly different way of managing it. Most of them had had their process, but it wasn't well defined. The county has now standardized that, so there's a website that the restaurants can go to fill out what they're doing from an employee standpoint, what they're requiring from a customer standpoint, and also having that check mark that shows that they are in compliance is part of the process. So posting those two things are really important for any retail, for any restaurants. The other thing that the order did was it allowed additional outdoor activities. So this included outdoor museums, historical sites, public gardens, and in talking with the county health, they're reconfirming, but as far as I see it, public gardens includes community gardens, and so I'm working with city staff to make sure that we can reopen the Charles Street Garden. One of the things that we ended up closing were those gardens along the way. The order also allowed people to participate in car parades, and we've seen that around the Bay Area. That what we'll say are illegal card parades have been happening, and the county put out the order that this is a non-essential trip, and people shouldn't be doing it. It's still required that families, that the only people inside the cars are families that are already members of the same household. They can't leave their car. They can't, bicycles or motorcycles can't be part of that parade. So there are a lot of restrictions that are still there, but it is important that at least people can go out and celebrate to some degree, whether or not it's a birthday, whether or not it's a graduation, in their car, kind of as from a parade standpoint. So one of the things that the order did do was make it very clear that all customers need to be wearing masks when they're inside of any public facility, any that's not their home, and that you should have a face mask with you whenever you're out. And there are exceptions, if you're under the age of 7, if you're exercising, if you're advised by a doctor not to wear a face mask of any sort. Definitely there's exceptions to the rule, and that is important. We realize that it's hard to get children to wear a mask, and they might have issues with it, but the new order kind of stabilizes what's required from a county standpoint, and that's really important. One other thing that the order did was, the last order was set to expire on May 31st. The latest order didn't really put a finite termination date. So the new order will continue until it's rescinded, superseded, or amended by the county health officer. And, in talking to county officials, something should be happening over the next 2 to 3 weeks. The next, another order will be coming out, almost guaranteed. But one of the things that's important is it's not on a set timeline. It's like we are looking at how we move into stage 2 fully, how do we move into stage 3 and stage 4 as far as opening up all of our businesses, all of our facilities, allowing people to congregate more. So this is, a more, I'll say, honest approach, that it's like, okay, it's not giving us an exact deadline, but at some point things will be opening up, and that's a given. It's just not saying, okay, by at least 5 days before May 31st or June 15th or June 30th, something will happen. It will be continued to be updated, and there is a lot of pressure being put on the county health department to open up as quickly as possible. And we've seen over the last few weeks all development, residential and commercial development restart. We've seen nurseries open. We've seen a lot of new operations. All real estate is currently open. Within the county is now open, and there's still a lot of pressure for those that haven't opened yet to open their businesses. And so how we move to restaurants to not just do delivery and takeout, to move to outdoor seating, or a certain percentage of seating indoors. And we talked last week about, the statewide, prescription on how restaurants will open up, and how a lot of common things like salt shakers and ketchup bottles won't be able to be used at tables anymore, how silverware will be delivered. So there's a lot of processes that's being defined at a state level on how the restaurant experience changes. But, you know, the first important thing is opening up and allowing people to actually come inside restaurants, uh, because, that's a lot of wait staff that still are unemployed. It's like right now, a lot of the restaurants have reduced down to, minimal front staff and front of the house staff, as well as those that are cooking the meals, and that's pretty much it. And so looking at what can be done next is really important. So from a council standpoint, council met twice this week, and that's not normal. Normally we only have one meeting every week or every other week, depending upon what happens. But on Tuesday night, we met, and let's see, we had several things that we talked about. One of which was uh, the the Columbian Neighborhood Center. So we renewed that agreement between the city and the Sunnyvale School District. And so the Columbia Neighborhood Center, which is right next to Columbia Middle School, has been active for about 20 years now. And it's really made a difference as far as that community is concerned. It provides a lot of services, from, healthcare to legal assistance to areas for congregation, uh, computer access. There's a lot of things that are happening at that center. And so one of the things that we just did was renew that contract with the Sunnyvale School District for the next 25 years. And to me, that's really good for that community. It's for, the Snail neighborhood, San Miguel, Lakewood. And definitely, I think that that's a resource. It's a great resource that we've been providing our residents for many years. And I think, one of the things that the current superintendent of schools, Dr. Picard, is retiring at the end of the school year. And it was, he was there and helped, define this operation at the very beginning. It was important that we actually renewed that contract while he was still there. Somebody who was, a strong proponent for doing this. And it is a partnership between our two, the school district and Sunnyvale, in order to make sure that resources are provided, there's appropriate staff. And so, continuing that partnership for another 25 years is only in everyone's best interest. The other thing, another thing that we did Tuesday night was council approved the purchase and the sale agreement between Mid-Penn Housing. And so Mid-Peninsula Housing is an affordable housing provider, nonprofit in the South Bay here. So it was for the purchase of 1178 Sonora Court. So this is currently it's a manufacturing facility near the Lawrence Caltrain station. And what we did a while, over the last, I'd say about 8 years, was, do a Lawrence Station specific plan to look at adding mixed use, so adding housing and commercial, as well as the retail around Lawrence Station, and evaluating that. Adding housing, ultimately that mixed use concept made it very, very important as far as Mid-Penn coming in and purchasing an old office, a manufacturing place that was there. When we started partnering with Mid-Peninsula Housing, we basically broached the concept of, if we bought the land, it's land for the city that we can maintain, and and make sure that it always remains affordable housing. And also having a portion of land at that station gives us certain flexibility, as where things stand 50 years from now. And so, that agreement did two things. It purchased the land for about $13.5 million. and that was the appraised value back in February, even before all this happened. It gave Midpen a 65-year ground lease, so they can extend that. But most buildings, most affordable housing doesn't last. It lasts about 50 years approximately, multifamily, and so this gives them time to build. Finish setting up the financial backing for this project, build the project, and then have it in place for at least 50 years before they come back to the city and figure out what is going to be done. The current plan is to build 175 affordable housing units there, and so I think that's really positive, and it's all for low income, and it's also mainly for families, which is really good. So it's 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms with a focus on 2 and 3 bedrooms, all walking distance to Caltrain. So I think that's really, really important from a community standpoint. And then lastly, a few minor things, but we also approved a heritage resource plaque program for private property. So one of the things that the Heritage Commission has always been doing is promoting, how do we get more focus on the history of Sunnyvale? And so what this program does is creates a program for residents in what I'll say are historic buildings to apply to put an up to 5 a year to apply for a plaque to talk about the history of that property when it was built. And so that program will roll out over the next year. But this allowed council to approve at least 5 plaques a year. It allows residents to apply, and then the Heritage Commission to evaluate those applications. So it gave that commission more to do as far as looking at preserving our heritage and how to publicize Sunnyvale's history. So I thought that was very good from a landmark and heritage standpoint for the city. And then yesterday was a very long day. It was our council all-day budget workshop, and council has 3 big all-day meetings a year. In early February, we have a strategic session. So that allows council to hear updates from the staff. It allows us to, figure out what staff services are, to talk somewhat freely about possible direction. It sets the policy and priorities for the city. And, the priorities haven't really changed over the last few years. So it is finishing the downtown. It's maintaining good environmental services and reducing climate change. It's working on housing. It's working on traffic. It's all the main things that are always a focus for the city. But one of the things, so we have a strategic session in early February. We have a study issue session in late February, early March every year to talk about study issues and proposed new policy or investigations for the city to set new policy or bring things back to council. And then the third, of course, is the budget session. So yesterday started at 8:30 a.m. and went to about 5:30 p.m. It takes a lot of work. The budget is about $500,000 every year, and it's the document that's created is about 1,000 pages. So there's a lot of work that goes behind it from a staff standpoint as well as a council standpoint to go through the different projects, the different operations, the different service levels. We talked last week about Newsom, Governor Newsom laid out the statewide budget, and a lot of they were tapping into the $16 billion rainy day fund over the next 3 years. There was initially going to be a $6 billion back in January. There's going to be a $6 billion surplus. Now there's going to be, I think it's about a $54 billion hole in the budget, and they're working with the federal government to try to say, please help us. The city works in a slightly different fashion. We don't, we can't print our own money like the federal government. We can't, you know, from a charter standpoint, Sunnyvale is pretty unique. From a charter, we have to have a 10-year balanced budget and a 20-year plan, and that makes a big difference when you're starting to look at the finances, where things are, when you start looking at a long-term cost and estimation of how long it's going to take before the economy recovers. You have to be conservative, and it's better to be conservative and then at the end of every year have a surplus that we then reallot to other programs like paying down CalPERS, or certain programs, increasing road improvements to improve our pavement index so that our roads look better, kicking off new programs. All those things are important. So we basically had a long meeting yesterday to figure out what what our response was. And the staff had already created a budget, had it pretty much done in at the end of February, and had to completely rework it over the last 3 months as in response to what was happening, with the pandemic, figuring out that immediately a lot of revenues were going to be dramatically reduced. And so, from our standpoint, it's still fairly stable. Property tax is about 50% of the general fund, the revenue to the general fund. So that makes it a little bit easier for our city as opposed to some other cities that rely more on retail. Several cities around us have had some very difficult decisions to make over the last few weeks. The big thing was, from our standpoint, we didn't furlough or lay anyone off, which was pretty important. We didn't do pay cut. We didn't do any pay or benefit reductions. I've heard of there have been furloughs at several cities around us. There have been talk about taking 10% pay cuts in certain cities. We did freeze certain open positions, and that went kind of across the board. From our standpoint, this was important. It didn't affect, and we're still evaluating what all the effects of this are. That being said, it mainly affected the amount of overtime for a lot of the personnel who were backfilling for these empty positions. And so we'll continue to evaluate that, and it's not easy, when certain services will be reduced somewhat, and certain employees have been getting a certain amount of overtime pay to do these additional tasks. Freezing those positions mean we basically freeze that in our budget for a year, for 2 years, depending upon what the positions are. But for me, it was really important that we didn't lay anyone off. And definitely we continue to evaluate if there's a retirement, if people leave the city, figuring out whether or not this is critical and adding it back in. But that was an easy thing for me to say, is we can't lay anyone off, and that was important in the short term. And we made some other very hard decisions. So we cut back. So we directed staff to cut back on the use of water at our city parks. So, and that's from 10 to 20%, and staff is evaluating that. We removed the contract tree trimming, and so there was about $600,000 of tree trimming that we contracted out to from a city standpoint. So we did contracting. That being said, that there are public works staff that still continue to do tree trimming. If you have a tree that's unsafe or you think that needs to be trimmed, definitely do Sunnyvale Access, report that tree. City staff is still doing that tree trimming, is still dealing with down branches and all that. The thing is, for a certain percentage of our services, like a certain percentage of road repair, a certain percentage of sidewalk repair, a certain percentage of tree trimming, we outsource that because it goes up and down depending upon the budget, depending upon what the need is. We also delayed sidewalk replacement for 1 year. So you'll still see some sidewalk replacements that are going on right now. So they're out, the crews are out right now replacing sidewalks. That being said, we have like a 5-year list of sidewalk replacements, and that's a continual sort of effort that goes on from a city standpoint. We decided to postpone the fiscal year 2020-2021 sidewalk replacement. Uh, if there's critical issues, staff will come out and do patching. If there's a specifically bad problem, staff will, still can do that replacement if required. But the backlog of all the sidewalk replacement was important. There were, other reductions that we considered that we decided not to do. Certain cities require any sidewalk replacement to be, a partnership between the homeowner and or the business owner and whatever sidewalk's being replaced. So if your sidewalk's cracked, then you have to pay 50-50 or 25%, and the city pays 75%. We took that off the table immediately. We knew that our residents wouldn't like that, and nobody wants to pay for the sidewalk in front of their house. That being said, to me it was important, continue to patch and then stay with the policy that we've had for many years of, the city will replace that sidewalk in front of your house. But it's important that we continue to reevaluate, this on a quarterly basis. So what we still don't know is what our revenue really looks like. We made estimates and we reduced a lot of these estimates way down. Reduced our transient occupancy tax, so the TOT tax that we get for hotels, our sales tax, all those we've reduced down quite a bit. But did we reduce it down enough? We don't know that. From a revenue standpoint, I've been advocating for the HEROES Act, and it's made it through Congress. We'll see if it makes it through the Senate or when it'll make it through the Senate, which would provide additional funding to cities smaller than 500,000 as opposed to the previous CARES Act. And to me, that's important, so if we start seeing additional funds come into the city, then we conceivably can reinstate some of the frozen positions. We can, do additional things that we basically cut back on, turn more water on, do more sidewalks. All those sorts of things are, the council trying to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And, if we've miscalculated, what we've done now is we've done some harder cuts, even more than what was recommended by staff, to give the city manager more flexibility over the next few months. That being said, if things are turned dramatically worse from a financial standpoint, if we've miscalculated as far as our revenue estimates were, or we don't see any additional support coming from a federal government, it's important that we come back and conceivably do even further cuts later in the year. But right now, we went beyond certain cuts that the city manager and staff had suggested. We did take a few things out, but those were relatively minor. But we were more fiscally conscious and fiscally conservative in the short term, which I thought was very important. And we'll see if that will actually will that be better? Will that be worse? We don't know right now, and hopefully things are on the uptick, and we still see more sales tax, we still see more TOT. So we'll see where things go. From a county dashboard standpoint, new cases continue to drop. The total number of cases in the county now is around 2,492. So it's down again from last week. There was another death yesterday, but we're seeing the number of cases drop, as well as the availability of the number of deaths drop. The availability of hospitals looks very good. There were I think there were 74 uh, people currently hospitalized with COVID-19. And last week they started tearing down the converted Santa Clara Convention Center hospital ward. So it had only about 20 patients along the way that had been quarantined there. So we do have, the appropriate capacity from a hospital standpoint. We have um, appropriate PPE available to our hospital and healthcare workers. So that was important from to make sure that we can actually move into stage 2. And then, as I said, I've been doing lots of advocating. I talked to the county supervisor last night, and earlier this week, I signed a letter opposing SB 1431. And so that would require local governments and school districts to give back tax rebates to property owners who claim that COVID-19 pandemic hurt their property values. And that could have been retroactive to January 2020. So, for us, we just finished a very difficult budget, but the concept of then, what money that we've already been allotted for this fiscal year that came into our coffers in 2019, 2020, to then come back after July 1st and say, okay, the property value for this business or for this owner is less than it was before because of COVID-19. Yes, you paid property taxes that were assessed last year, and there are ways of going through assessment, but normally that's not like a major number of instances. But because 50% of our budget comes from property taxes, it was very worrisome that conceivably we have to pay back, and the school districts would have to pay back this money during these critical times as we're trying to balance our budget and looking at closing the current year budget. From other advocacy, a few weeks ago I talked about the letter that went out to the county from the 15 mayors, and it was well received at the county level by both the supervisors and the health department. I had a Zoom meeting with one of the county supervisors last night, and the county is starting to do testing in North County, which has been most of its focus so far. The county's focus has been in South County and East County. So we're starting next week to do focus testing within the county, and so you should see some announcements about that soon. But that would be 1 or 2 permanent locations in Mountain View are currently looked at, as well as a mobile location. And so as soon as that goes active, I'll publicize that. But it's important that to move forward as far as stage 2 and stage 3 is concerned, we need to have more testing and we need to have tracing. From a testing standpoint, the goal from the county is to hit 4,000 tests per day by the end of the month, and they're have been ramping up and adding these additional facilities in North County will actually help out on that. The other thing is tracing, and so what the cities what the cities asked for is more tracing, more testing, more tracing, and providing facilities. Can we provide staff? And so we've been reaching out and evaluating staff. Can they do a portion of their time if they're working remotely to assist? Are they interested in actually helping out that? We're also publicizing, I want to publicize that if people are interested in supporting the county effort, definitely feel free, I'll publicize that also. But, the county is looking for members in our community that want to help with tracing. And contract tracing is important because, it prevents additional cases when somebody has been diagnosed with COVID-19. So it helps spread the virus by figuring out that the people who have been in contact with from the person with COVID-19. So, and especially as we move forward, we need to we anticipate that it'll need to reach up to about 21,000 contacts of exposed individuals each week. So at some point, we'll be having to contact 21,000 people, and that is a big effort. And so volunteers will be teamed with health department staff at a county level. There's a whole training process that will be put in place. Team members will interview cases. They will call potential contacts. They will, enter and manage data. So it is a very data-driven, but it can be done remotely. And so what they're looking for is people with the ability to work remotely at least 24 hours per week, and ideally full-time, 40 hours per week. And this is one of the things that the mayors asked for a partnership with the county. One of the issues was the county was initially requesting 40 hours a week for six to 12 months, which to dedicate city staff, especially in a difficult budget year when we're trying to pivot staff to fill services conceivably that they weren't working on before, as opposed to lay people off. That was difficult. So the county is kind of resetting their expectations, but they're also looking for residents with the ability to work for 24 to 40 hours a week for 3 months. So it's been reduced from 6 to 12 months to 3 to 6 months. If you have customer service, interpersonal skills, for especially on the phone, if you have strong written and communication skills, and especially if you have other languages, especially Spanish and Vietnamese, this is, the county is really needing your help. And so if you want to interview, if you want to help out, the URL is sccgov.org/icanhelp, ICANHELP. So you can read more information there about what the requirements are and what the task ultimately would be. Okay, so let's get to the questions for the week. So I've gotten this question a lot over the last week. When is the Sunnyvale Cares program, business assistance program, going to go live? What are we going to do as far as making it available to small businesses? What are the details of that program? So that's finally been updated on the city website. So the Sunnyvale Cares program, to remind people, was a program of city funds and private donations. And so between the city putting in $600,000, private donations putting in $700,000 plus a little right now, it's about $1.3 million to assist small businesses with the impacts of COVID-19. And the program would offer grants of up to $15,000 for qualified small businesses. Businesses, must have businesses must have 1 to 50 full-time employees. Restaurants must have up to 100 full-time employees because a lot of their employees are part-time. So that that's one of the first things. So that's some of the basic qualification. The grant program will go live next Wednesday at 1 p.m. And as opposed to a first come, first serve basis, it'll be a window. So they'll start accepting online applications at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, May 27th, and then complete the end application window on 1 p.m. Wednesday, June 2nd. So you'll have 1 week to apply. So it's not a first come, first serve basis. It's not going to be, what I've heard on other places of such a large number of people applying that the website crashes, and there's been a lot of issues from a county and a state level as far as that's concerned. Grants will be funded, as opposed to the first come, first serve, on a lottery basis. So, and those grants can help cover payroll, rent, inventory, personal protective equipment. So it's trying to help out these small businesses however we can. We know that we will end up running out of money. If you want to donate, there's a place to donate, write checks, and I think they're adding an online donation. If you want to donate, you can definitely support your local businesses. but you can also donate a check and it'll be distributed, randomly to those businesses that are that are in need. So to find out more information, go to our Sunnyvale website, sunnyvale.ca.gov/svcares, so SVCARES, and it'll give more information. It'll give you the application process. It'll show you where, and how to apply. And so that's for small businesses as well as nonprofits. So nonprofits also can apply through that program. Okay, other questions. When are the tennis courts opening? And I've been getting that question pretty much every week for the last few weeks. Last Friday, the Sunnyvale Tennis Center opened, so right next to Las Palmas Park. So that opened, and keep in mind that that's for single players, not for doubles. It's also within the same household. And public courts open today. So staff is still working on signage for those courts. That being said, it's the same requirements. It's only for single players. It's only for people within the same household. But all the courts I went by, Washington Park tennis courts this morning, and they were open, and the doors had been unlocked. They've been padlocked for the last few weeks when the county health order and when the state health order basically said that tennis was not allowed. Next question, when is the Smart Station opening? The Smart Station actually opened last Monday, so it's been open almost 2 weeks now. And there's been a lot of changes. There's COVID-19 safety protocols in place. All employees and members of the public are required to wear face masks when they're there. The CRV Buyback Center is currently closed. It'll be opening on June 1st for appointment only. But all the other normal, what I'll call normal operation within the Smart Station is open, and it doesn't need appointments. So there's compost pickup, so you can go, a lot of people are working on their gardens. You can pick up compost. You need to bring your own shovel, your own containers. You, of course, only can have one person from a vehicle collecting the compost, and the long-term rule of a maximum of 96 gallons per week is still in place. So you can only collect 96 gallons. The drop-off center, so the recycling drop-off center is open, and I know a lot of people have been cleaning out their garages and attics. So you can now drop off cardboard and scrap metal, electronics, plastic, glass, fluorescent bulbs, batteries, paint Monday through Friday, and used motor oil, oil filters, cooking oil. All those are now available for drop-off at the Smart Station. And then public material disposal, as far as dumping, you can still dump. You can dump tires, trash, mattresses, whatever. But of course, there'll be contactless payment as far as that's concerned. The food scraps bin at the Smart Station is now open, and this is really important for the multifamily residents who want to take part in the food scrap program. I know that there are a lot of them out there, and we're working towards implementing a food scraps program. Part of our Tuesday night meeting was a study session on how we roll that out in the next few years in response to some state legislation. But for right now, people in apartments or condos don't have food scrap collection, and what they can do is take that to the Smart Station. So if your family wants to do its part, as far as it does two things, contributing to the food scrap program keeps food out of the landfill, which reduces methane gas and is really important from an environmental standpoint, but it also, most importantly, reduces the weight of the food of the material that goes into the landfill. So our rates last year went down from a garbage standpoint, and that was all due to the food cycle program, because food waste is very heavy with water, and because of that, the waste at the end of the day went to landfill ended up not just less food going in, but less water-filled food going in. So it was a lot lighter, and we saved a lot of money from a city standpoint. So if you live in a multifamily apartment or condos, definitely think about being part of the food scraps program. One of the questions I got is, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, what is the Great Plates meal delivery program? And so a few weeks ago I mentioned about restaurants that could sign up for the program. What this is a state program that the state is going to pay 96% of the cost of that, and then 4% would be paid conceivably by the county. And this is for seniors or other adults at high risk from COVID-19 who are staying at home and keep making sure that they can stay healthy. They can get up to 2 nutritious meals delivered daily to their home. To be eligible, residents need to be 65 years or older, and they can't be receiving federal nutrition assistance program money. So what comes down to is if they're 65 years or older, or if they're between 60 and 64 and COVID-19 positive or exposed or have underlying health conditions defined by the CDC, they need to be living alone or living with an adult who's also eligible, and they can't be receiving federal nutrition assistance programs money like CalFresh, or senior center meals. So if they're not receiving those, they can basically sign up for the MySourceWise at mysourcewise.com. And there are also income restrictions. If I remember, $75,000 for annual income for a household of 1, or $101,000 for a household of 2. But you can go to the website and get more information. Hopefully you can sign up. It's mysourcewise.com, mysourcewise.com, and you can sign up there. It's important. It actually helps the restaurants provide meals and deliver meals, as well as it also helps out a lot of people, seniors that are at home that can't get out and are having difficulties either making their own food. It gives them assistance and gives them additional variety of food on a daily basis. Are you looking at closing some streets to cars in order to expand outdoor seating space? So this comes up. Definitely we are looking at closing Murphy Avenue to cars and making an outdoor seating area so that as restaurants open up, they can move out to not just the sidewalk but to the street. This is one of the things I've been working with the county and the supervisors on, as far as that approval process. The city's already looking at expediting that process as quickly as possible once it's allowed at a county level. That being said, that there are ABC laws and county health laws that need to be cleared, and that process needs to be streamlined as much as possible when we do it. I'm also talking to city staff about how we do that in like strip malls. Can they take a certain percentage of the parking spaces directly in front of their in front of their restaurant? All that becomes very important. You still need to provide pickup, but you do need to provide a certain amount of parking. So it's figuring out what that ratio is and how to implement that, from a location by location basis. Is it the landlord's responsibility to rent the cones? There's a lot of different places that might want to open up, but the city, doesn't have cones to put them everywhere throughout the city. So that becomes a very big deal as far as that's concerned. Let's see what else I have. What's the status of closing lanes on Tasman for bicyclists and pedestrians? Does Sunnyvale have a buffered pylons that are needed? Does the city still have a shortage of cones? So I've been talking to city staff about that. It looks like that cost would be approximately $30,000, and we're going through that as far as the installation costs and and the appropriate pylons. That being said, I'm currently evaluating whether or not to agendize this and how quickly we can get this, as a trial program, at least on some of those streets that don't have sidewalks. This is one of the issues about Tasman. It doesn't have full sidewalks between Fair Oaks and Tasman, and Lawrence and Tasman, and so there are definitely people that don't have that capability. Can I donate to the Sunnyvale Cares program? So yes, you can. Go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/svcares, and it gives you that process. What happened to Hands on the Arts? So the 35th annual Hands on the Arts was supposed to happen last Saturday, and this was a really great yearly event that brought children together and their parents to be more creative. And so, at the community center every year, there was hundreds of children that are basically doing hands-on artwork in lots of different ways, from music to painting to string to lots of different things, to basically encourage children's creativity and see what they like. It's been a lot more popular over the last few years, but because of COVID-19, we've had to cancel that as far as this year. That being said, tomorrow is the remote Hands on the Arts kickoff. So tomorrow there will be new online videos that city staff has put together, and I've actually helped out with one of them. But there'll be online videos that children can figure out, what items that they have at home, how they can be more creative. And so it gave a whole bunch of small art projects to our residents, to our children, to our families to try at home. And so that was the main focus that we're trying to do, is trying to make sure that definitely things are stable, that there is some Hands on the Arts that's still happening this year. Is there a fee to pick up soil from the Smart Station? And it's compost, and so it's not soil, but there is no fee. It's free to all Sunnyvale residents, and they will check you, every now and then to make sure that you are allowed to be there. The Smart Station is a partnership between Mountain View, Palo Alto, and Sunnyvale. So any of those residents can come and pick up compost, and so that is actually a positive thing for the city. So a certain percentage of the yard waste. So we sell off a certain percentage of our yard waste. The rest of it we convert into compost. The food waste we talked about earlier is actually either sent and converted into biofuel, into a protein powder, and broken down into a very acidic water, or it's actually used for fueling our Smart Station itself, so in our wastewater treatment plant. So we're looking at other ways of using that food waste. But the compost, which we have very highly valued compost when we're selling it off, because as opposed to some cities, we don't allow our residents to throw in pizza box containers and other things. So our compost is very clean, and because of that, it gets a higher market value, 5 times as much as some other cities. So it's actually very good from running the Smart Station from our standpoint. Have you considered asking the banks to do businesses to have investments in Sunnyvale to defer loan payments? So that's one of the things I've been advocating for. That's more at a state level, and Governor Newsom announced that some banks are doing that. From a local level, a lot of the banking is done completely to state or regional level. I've been doing some advocating, but that has kind of fallen on deaf ears, and it's nice to ask the state to keep pushing the banks to do that. But from a city standpoint, we don't have a lot of power as far as that's concerned. And I think that's pretty much it for the day. It's been another busy week. It's after 10 a.m. and I'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again today. Remember, this coming Monday is Memorial Day. So I wanted to inform everyone or remind everyone that the 129th Rescue Wing will be doing 2 flyovers on Monday between 11:30 a.m. and 3 p.m. So you'll hear them and you'll see them. The flyovers demonstrate the U.S. Air Force's continued readiness and expresses gratitude to the healthcare workers, first responders, other essential personnel that are working. It'll be one, and I'm not a plane. I can't remember all the different types of planes. A one Combat King 2 aircraft, and then of course there'll be two Hawk rescue helicopters that'll also be there. So you'll see several planes, helicopters flying over. They're constantly doing training, and so they're intermixing training with honoring our healthcare workers. So and I just want to say I'm continuing to be proud of Sunnyvale's response to our pandemic. Continue to help your neighbors, check in on your neighbors, make and share, face coverings, share homemade cookies and bread, help continue to build our community. These are trying times for everyone, but it does make a difference. I'm proud to see our Sunnyvale residents pulling together to help their neighbors, to help strangers. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello, all from a safe social distance, of course. People miss that social interaction, and I think we will see, things start to open up over the next month, that people will start being able to congregate in small groups again. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening, and until next week, stay safe. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.